What does $700 million look like? Does it look like this woman, dressed in a simple hoodie, sitting quietly in seat 1A? Flight attendant Susan Croft didn't think so. Passenger Caroline Dumont certainly didn't. They saw a problem. They saw someone who didn't belong. They decided to remove her. What they didn't know? They weren't just removing a passenger. They were removing the key investor that kept their entire airline from collapsing. One call, just one call from the terminal, was all it took to freeze $700 million and send an entire corporation into a full-blown meltdown. This isn't a story about money. It's about a lesson that cost an airline almost $1 billion to learn. The Tom Bradley International Terminal at LAX was a sea of orchestrated chaos, but inside the Global Air Alliance first-class flagship lounge, the world was muted. The champagne was complimentary, the lighting was dim, and the anxiety of travel was smoothed over with plush carpets and obsequious staff. In a quiet corner, Aria Vance was invisible, and she liked it that way. At 28, Aria was a ghost in the machine of global finance. Forbes had tried to profile her twice. She'd declined. Bloomberg Terminals flashed her company's name, Nexus Logistics, an AI-driven predictive shipping algorithm that had quietly become the backbone of 3/4 of the world's maritime trade. But her face was unknown. She was a billionaire several times over, but her uniform was invariably a dark, cashmere, Loro Piana hoodie, custom-made jeans, and simple, logoless white sneakers. The only hint of her wealth was the watch on her wrist, a Patek Philippe 6102R, which looked less like a timepiece and more like a map of the night sky. She wasn't new money flashing, she was intellect money, and she had better things to think about. Today, she was flying from LAX to JFK on GAA Flight 112, a flagship transcontinental route. She was in first class, seat 1A. She wasn't flying private today, because she liked the anonymity of commercial travel. It was grounding. A commotion near the bar pulled her from the technical schematics on her tablet. A woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair and a wrist full of rattling Cartier love bracelets, was loudly admonishing a bartender. I specifically asked for the Veuve Clicquot La Grande Dame, not the standard yellow label. Is that so difficult to understand? For what my husband pays for this membership? Aria sighed and put her noise-cancelling headphones back on. She recognized the type. Old money, new money, it didn't matter. Some people just felt the need to prove they existed by making noise. 10 minutes later, the boarding call for Flight 112 began. Aria packed her tablet, slung her simple backpack over one shoulder, and joined the first-class line. The woman from the lounge, Caroline Dumont, as Aria would later learn, was directly in front of her. Caroline handed her passport and boarding pass to the agent with a flourish, then turned and looked at Aria. It wasn't a glance. It was an inspection. A cold, appraising stare that travelled from Aria's sneakers up to her hoodie, lingering on her dark skin and the simple cornrows pulled back from her face. Caroline sniffed, a tiny, audible puff of disdain, and turned back around. Aria felt the familiar, dull thud of annoyance. It was the tax she paid for existing while black and successful. She ignored it and handed her own pass to the agent. "Welcome aboard, Miss Vance," the agent said with a professional smile. "Seat 1A. Please enjoy your flight." Aria walked down the jet bridge, stepped onto the aircraft, and was greeted by a flight attendant with a smile that seemed painted on. "Welcome to first class. Can I help you find your seat?" 1A, thank you. I've got it," Aria said, gesturing to the very first seat in the pod-style cabin. She stowed her bag in the overhead bin, sat down, and pulled out her tablet. She was just settling in when a shadow fell over her. It was Caroline Dumont, who was in seat 1C across the aisle. And beside her was the flight attendant from the door, whose name tag read Susan Croft. "Mum," Susan said, her voice laced with a saccharine-sweet condescension. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." Aria looked up, confused. "I just showed it to the gate agent." "I know, dear, but we just need to double-check. There seems to be some confusion." Caroline Dumont was standing with her arms crossed, glaring. "I just want to be sure everyone in this cabin is supposed to be here, Susan. It's a matter of security and comfort." The implication hung in the air, thick and toxic. "You don't belong here." Aria felt a cold stillness settle over her. She was not a public person. She was not a fighter. She was a builder. But she would not be moved. "My boarding pass is on my phone," Aria said calmly, unlocking her screen and pulling up the QR code. Susan scanned it with a small handheld device. It beeped green. "Vance, Aria. Seat 1A, first." Susan's painted smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She had clearly expected an error. She had wanted an error. "See?" Aria said, her voice flat. "No confusion." "Well," Susan recovered. "Even so, this is first class. We do expect a certain level of decorum. Your attire is a little casual for this cabin." Aria blinked. "My attire? Is there a dress code for Global Air Alliance First Class that I'm unaware of? Because I've read the terms of carriage. There isn't." Susan was floundering, but Caroline Dumont stepped in. "She was glaring at me in the lounge," Caroline lied, her voice rising in pitch. "She made me feel unsafe. I don't feel comfortable sharing a cabin with her. She seems aggressive." Aggressive. The word hit Aria like a slap. It was the classic lazy weapon. She hadn't said a word. She'd been reading about sensor fusion in logistics AI. "I was not glaring at you," Aria said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "I was working. I don't even know who you are." "You see," Caroline shrieked, pointing. "She's being hostile. Susan, I am a 1,000,000-mile flyer. My husband is Richard Dumont. You must do something." Susan Croft made her choice. She saw a hysterical, diamond-encrusted, important passenger and a young black woman in a hoodie who was, in her estimation, nobody. She chose the path of least resistance. "Ma'am," Susan said, turning back to Aria, "we have a right to refuse service to anyone who is causing a disturbance or making other passengers feel unsafe." "I am causing no disturbance. I am sitting in my assigned seat," Aria stated. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. We can discuss this back in the terminal." Aria looked at her. Really looked at her. "You are asking me to deplane." "We are telling you to deplane," a new male voice said. A man in a cheap suit with a GAA manager's badge, Mark Jenkins, had arrived, summoned by Susan. "Grab your bag, ma'am. We're not going to hold up an entire flight for this." The other first-class passengers were staring now. Some with pity, some with annoyance, some with the same smug satisfaction as Caroline Dumont. Aria Vance looked at Susan. She looked at Mark. She looked at Caroline, who was smirking in triumph. Slowly, deliberately, Aria stood up. She reached into the overhead bin and pulled down her simple backpack. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She simply held Mark Jenkins's gaze and said, "You are all making a catastrophic mistake." "We'll take that under advisement," Mark sneered. "This way, please." Aria Vance, founder of Nexus Logistics and owner of a 12-figure fortune, was walked off Flight 112 like a common criminal to the satisfied smirk of Caroline Dumont. The jet bridge was a cold, liminal space. The stale metallic air felt oppressive as Aria walked behind Mark Jenkins, his polyester suit jacket straining across his shoulders. She could hear the murmur of the economy passengers behind her, their boarding process now paused. She was, in this moment, a spectacle, a problem to be dealt with. At the gate, Mark turned to her, his face set in a mask of managerial indifference. "Now, ma'am, we're going to rebook you on the next available flight." "Which is when?" Arya asked, her voice betraying no emotion. "Looks like 10:45 p.m., a red-eye. We can get you a seat in Economy Plus," he said, tapping on his terminal. Arya almost laughed. It was an insult layered on an injury. "I paid for a first-class lie-flat seat. You removed me based on a fabricated complaint from another passenger, and your solution is a middle seat in economy 8 hours from now. Take it or leave it, ma'am. You created a disturbance. We don't have to rebook you at all. Frankly, you're lucky we're not banning you from the airline." Behind him, Susan Croft had reappeared from the plane, her face flushed with victory. "She's all clear, Mark. We've closed the door." "Good," Mark said. He printed out a flimsy voucher. "Here's a $15 meal voucher for your trouble." Arya looked at the small piece of paper. $15. It was so absurd, so profoundly symbolic of how little they saw her, that the cold stillness in her chest finally solidified into something new. It was not anger. It was purpose. Arya had built her empire on one principle: logistics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Data points are connected. A ship delayed in Singapore causes a shortage of microchips in Stuttgart. A storm in the Atlantic means a price hike on coffee in Ohio. And a flight attendant named Susan Croft, a gate manager named Mark Jenkins, and a passenger named Carolyn Dumont, representing Global Air Alliance, had just created a data point. They thought they were removing a problem. They had no idea they had just initiated a sequence. "You're right," Arya said, her voice so soft Mark leaned in to hear her. "I won't be taking that 10:45 p.m. flight." "Good, then we're done here," Mark said, turning away. "Oh, we're not done," Arya said to his back. "You just haven't realized it yet." She turned, walked away from the gate, and found a quiet spot by a charging station, watching as Flight 112, her flight, finally pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway. She pulled out her phone. It wasn't the standard consumer model. It was a custom-built, cryptographically secure device that cost more than Mark Jenkins's car. She had 2 numbers on her speed dial. One was for her mother. The other was for Julian Hayes. Julian was the head of the Vance family office, a famously aggressive private wealth fund that managed Arya's liquid assets, her investments, and her philanthropic endeavors. Julian was a shark, a man who spoke in basis points and leverage, and he was ruthlessly loyal. He picked up on the first ring. "Arya, you're supposed to be in the air. Is everything all right?" His voice was crisp, New York sharp. "I'm still at LAX," Arya said. She recounted the entire incident. She didn't embellish. She didn't editorialize. She just gave him the data points. Global Air Alliance, Flight 112, Flight Attendant Susan Croft, Gate Manager Mark Jenkins, Passenger Carolyn Dumont, Seat 1C, removed from the flight, accusation of being aggressive, rebooked on a 10:45 p.m. red-eye, offered a $15 meal voucher. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Arya could hear the faint, furious click, click, click of Julian's keyboard. "Julian," Arya said, "where are we with the GAA financing deal?" Another pause. Julian's voice came back, and it was several degrees colder. "GAA is in the final stages of its Chapter 11 restructuring. They're securing $700 million in exit financing to stabilize their operations. It's a syndicated loan, led by a private equity fund." "Which one?" Arya asked, though she already knew. "Blackstone," Julian said. The specific fund is their new $4.2 billion Pathfinder Credit Fund. And the Vance family office's position in that fund? We are the anchor limited partner, Aria. We committed $100 million. Our commitment was the signal that brought in the other LPs. Without us, the fund doesn't just lose our $100 million. The entire deal structure collapses. The $700 million wire, it's scheduled to go through today. Aria looked out the window at the sunny LA tarmac. Freeze it. Julian stopped typing. Aria, freeze it doesn't mean pause. If we pull our commitment now, Blackstone's fund defaults on its obligation to GAA. The exit financing disappears. GAA's restructuring fails. They will be insolvent by Monday. We're talking total liquidation, selling off their planes for parts, 50,000 employees out of a job. I understand the logistics, Julian, Aria said. I am a material investor in a deal. The vendor in that deal, Global Air Alliance, has just proven to me that their corporate culture is fundamentally broken. They are a liability. Their internal controls are non-existent. They employ staff who make decisions based on prejudice, not policy. They kicked a Patek-wearing, first-class, ticket-holding, anchor investor off a plane because another passenger didn't like her hoodie. It's a bad investment. The firm is racist, and its service is compromised. I am losing confidence in their ability to deliver any service, let alone a return on a $700 million investment. Julian let out a slow breath. He got it. This wasn't revenge. This was risk management. Okay, he said. I'm calling David Armitage at Blackstone directly. I'm invoking the material adverse change clause in our LP agreement, citing a demonstrable failure of corporate governance and a direct act of racial discrimination by the beneficiary of the fund, GAA. I'm pulling our $100 million commitment, effective immediately. And the $700 million? It's gone. Blackstone can't wire it without our capital. The entire loan syndicate will collapse within the hour. GAA's $700 million lifeline just went to zero. Good, Aria said. One more thing, Julian. Who is Caroline Dumont? Seat 1C. Husband is Richard Dumont. More typing. Richard Dumont? Oh, this is good. He's a senior partner at Skadden Arps. And he's the lead counsel for Global Air Alliance in their Chapter 11 filing. He's the man who structured the Blackstone deal. His entire career is riding on that $700 million wire. Aria allowed herself a small, grim smile. The data points were all connecting. Leak it, Julian, she said. Call Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal. Anonymous tip. GAA's 700 meters exit financing has been inexplicably frozen. Key investors have pulled out, citing significant last-minute concerns over the airline's internal operations and corporate culture. Let them dig. They'll find the flight manifest. They'll find me. They'll find her. Consider it done, Julian said. I'll have a Gulfstream G700 ready for you at the private terminal in 60 minutes. A car is on its way to you at Tom Bradley. Thank you, Julian. Aria hung up. She stood, picked up her backpack, and began walking toward the exit. She passed the gate for Flight 112. Mark Jenkins was gone. A new, smiling agent was boarding the economy passengers. Everything was normal. For the next 10 minutes, it would be. Robert Strickland, the CEO of Global Air Alliance, was in the middle of a celebratory lunch in a private dining room in Chicago. He was with his CFO, Bill, and the top brass from their legal team. They were 90 minutes away from the press conference, where they would announce that GAA was officially out of bankruptcy, recapitalized, and ready to dominate the skies. To the future, gentlemen, Robert said, raising a glass of sparkling water. It was a rough 2 years, but that $700 million from Blackstone puts us back in the black. We're saved. His CFO, Bill, raised his own glass. "I'll toast when the wire confirmation hits my inbox. It's due by 3:00 p.m. Central. Any minute now." As if on cue, Bill's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, a smile on his face. The smile vanished. His face turned a sickly, pale grey. "Bill, is that it? The confirmation?" Robert asked. Bill looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with the terror Robert had only seen during the 2008 crash. "Bill, what is it?" It's from Blackstone," Bill stammered. "It's from David Armitage's office. The wire it's not coming." Robert Strickland's fork clattered onto his plate. "What do you mean it's not coming? It's a done deal. The contracts are signed. It's non-negotiable." "A key LP in the fund just pulled their commitment," Bill read, his voice shaking. "They invoked a material adverse change clause. Blackstone's fund is broken. The syndicate is dissolved. Robert, the $700 million is gone. The entire deal is dead." The air was sucked out of the room. A bead of sweat trickled down Robert's temple. "No," Robert whispered. "That's impossible. Who pulled? Who has that much power? No single LP can just do that." "Apparently," Bill said. "This one con. They were the anchor. The entire deal was built on their commitment." Robert's mind was racing. "Who? Tell me the name of the LP, Bill." "They won't say. They can't say. LP agreements are ironclad confidential." "Then it's over," Robert said, slumping in his chair. "We're done. We file for Chapter 7 liquidation on Monday. We're finished." His personal assistant burst into the room, not even bothering to knock, her face as pale as Bill's. "Mr. Strickland, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to take this call." "I'm busy, Susan," Robert roared. "I'm busy liquidating a $70 billion company." "Sir, it's Julian Hayes, from the Vance family office." Robert froze. The Vance family office? As in Aria Vance? Nexus Logistics? He knew that name. Everyone in the global supply chain knew that name. She was a kingmaker, a shadow power. He'd been trying to get a meeting with her for a year to discuss a cargo partnership. "Put him through," Robert said, his heart pounding a new, terrified rhythm. "On speaker." The assistant fumbled with the polycom. Julian Hayes's voice filled the room, cold and sharp as a scalpel. "Mr. Strickland, thank you for taking my call." "Mr. Hayes, a pleasure. What can I do for you?" Robert tried to sound casual. "I'm calling you as a courtesy, Robert. My principal, Ms. Aria Vance, was scheduled to fly on your airline today. Flight 112, LAX to JFK, seat 1A. Robert looked at Bill. "What is this?" "I am pleased to hear it," Robert said, confused. "Oh, she's not on the flight," Julian said. "She was forcibly removed. By your gate manager, Mark Jenkins, at the request of your flight attendant, Susan Croft. It seems another passenger, a Caroline Dumont, they didn't feel comfortable with Ms. Vance's presence. Your staff accused Ms. Vance of being aggressive and inappropriate for the first-class cabin. They then offered her an economy seat on a red-eye and a $15 meal voucher for her troubles." Every drop of blood drained from Robert Strickland's face. He was connecting the dots. The Anchor LP, the Vance family office. "Oh my God," Robert whispered. "Yes," Julian said, his voice void of all sympathy. "Ms. Vance is, as you know, the founder of Nexus Logistics. Her family office also happens to be the $100 million Anchor Limited partner in the Blackstone fund that was, until 30 minutes ago, financing your company's exit from bankruptcy." Robert Strickland made a small gasping sound. "Ms. Vance," Julian continued, "found it imprudent to continue with a 9-figure investment in a company that demonstrates such a catastrophic lack of judgment and such overt, systemic prejudice. We have, as you are now aware, pulled our commitment. The $700 million deal is dead. Mr. Hayes, Julian, please, Robert begged, his voice cracking. It was a mistake, a terrible misunderstanding, a low-level employee. It's not corporate policy. It is your policy, Robert, Julian said. Your employees felt empowered to make that decision. They saw a young black woman in a hoodie and assumed she was a threat. They sided with a hysterical, bigoted passenger over their actual first-class customer. That's not a mistake. That is your culture. And Ms. Vance has just decided she will not be funding it. Where is she? Robert shrieked. Is she still at LAX? I'll get on a plane right now. I will fire those employees. I will fire them in front of her. Ms. Vance is no longer your concern. A Bloomberg reporter, however, might be. They seem to be sniffing around a story about GAA's financing collapsing, and they're asking why a prominent black tech billionaire was just kicked off one of your flights. This is going to be a very bad news cycle for you. Please, Robert was openly weeping now. Put her on the phone. Let me apologize. Ms. Vance has made other arrangements. You had your chance, Robert. Oh, and one last thing. You might want to call your lead counsel, Richard Dumont. I have a feeling he's about to have a very bad day. Goodbye. The line clicked. Dead silence filled the dining room. Robert Strickland stared at the phone. He was shaking so hard he could barely stand. He looked at his CFO. Get me the head of LAX, he roared, his voice a broken, savage thing. Get me that flight. Turn it around. Land it in Phoenix, I don't care. Find those employees. Find them. Now. On board GAA Flight 112, now 30,000 feet over Nevada, Caroline Dumont was sipping her second glass of non-La Grande Dame champagne. She was feeling marvelous. She had protected the sanctity of the first-class cabin. She had shown that aggressive girl her place. She felt powerful. Her husband, Richard, was supposed to be celebrating today. That $700 million deal was his baby. It was his masterpiece of legal and financial structuring. It meant a massive bonus. It meant a new house in the Hamptons. It meant everything. Her reverie was broken by the ding of the in-flight Wi-Fi connecting. Her phone buzzed, and buzzed again, and again. A torrent of notifications. One was a Google alert for her husband's name. The headline was from Bloomberg. GAA's 700 meters exit financing collapses as key investor pulls out. Caroline's stomach dropped. Collapses? That couldn't be right. Her phone rang. It was her husband, Richard. She answered, a nervous laugh in her throat. Darling, congratulations, The voice that came through the phone was not human. It was a raw, primal scream of absolute panic. Caroline, what did you do? What did you do? Richard, what's wrong? I'm on the plane. The deal is dead, Caroline. The Blackstone deal. It's gone. The $700 million, it's vanished. An LP pulled out. What? How? Who? I don't know. But Skadden just called me. Bloomberg called me. They're asking about an incident on Flight 112. They're asking, oh God, Caroline. They're asking why my wife had a passenger named Aria Vance removed from the flight. Caroline Dumont went cold. Aria? Who? The girl in the hoodie? That was her name? Yes, Richard shrieked, and she could hear him hyperventilating. Aria Vance, the founder of Nexus Logistics, the shadow queen of tech. She was the anchor LP, you imbecile. She was the money. My entire deal was backed by her, and you had her kicked off the plane. Caroline's phone slipped from her hand. It clattered to the floor. Aria Vance. The other passengers were staring at her. Her face was ashen. Up in the cockpit, the captain received a frantic, encrypted message directly from GAA's Chicago Operations Center. It was a command he'd never seen in 30 years of flying. Flight 112, land immediately. Nearest suitable airport. Declare emergency if necessary. CEO priority. Do not proceed to JFK. Confirm. The captain, stunned, looked at his co-pilot. What the hell? He got on the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an unforeseen security issue, we will be diverting to Las Vegas. We apologize for the inconvenience and will have more information when we land. The cabin erupted in groans. Caroline Dumont just sat there, frozen, as the plane began a steep, banking turn. Meanwhile, back at LAX, Mark Jenkins and Susan Croft were in the employee break room, laughing about the diva in the hoodie. Mark's phone rang. The caller ID was Robert Strickland, CEO. Mark's blood turned to ice. A CEO never, ever calls a gate manager. He answered it. Mr. Strickland, this is Mark Jenk. He didn't get to finish. The sound that came from the phone was so loud, so full of rage, that Susan could hear it from across the room. You arrogant, idiotic fool! Do you know what you've done? You have just bankrupted this company. You! Sir, I don't understand. The passenger was... Her name was Aria Vance. You moron. Aria Vance. She was our 700 million, and you... For what? A passenger in 1C? You threw away this entire airline for a Karen in 1C. Susan Croft began to shake, her coffee cup rattling in its saucer. Sir, Mark was sputtering. You're fired, Strickland screamed. Both of you. You and that flight attendant, Susan Croft. Pack your bags. Security is on their way. Your careers are over. The line went dead. Mark Jenkins slid down the wall, his face white. What? What did he mean? 700 million? Susan whispered. He meant, Mark said, his voice a hollow echo, that we're not the only ones who just lost our jobs. He meant we just lost everyone's jobs. Aria Vance stepped out of the Tom Bradley terminal into the bright, smoggy afternoon. The chaos of the arrivals pickup area was a sharp contrast to the cold, quiet lounge she'd been in. A black, immaculate Mercedes-Maybach S-Class sedan pulled to the curb, parting the sea of Priuses and taxis. A man in a dark suit, her personal security detail, stepped out and opened the rear door. Ms. Vance, we were sorry to hear about the delay. Mr. Hayes has your G700 spooled and ready at the private suite. Thank you, David, Aria said, sliding into the cool, leather-scented interior. As the car pulled away, she looked back at the massive, chaotic terminal. Inside, thousands of people were going about their day, unaware that the airline they were flying was, at this very second, in a financial death spiral. All because two of its employees, in a moment of petty, prejudiced power, had decided she didn't belong. The car moved silently, heading for the discreet, ultra-exclusive private suite at the other end of the airport. This was a terminal for the 0.01%. No lines, no TSA, no public gates, just quiet bungalows, a private security screening, and a car that drives you directly to the stairs of your aircraft. This was how she usually traveled. Today, she'd wanted to be normal. The universe, it seemed, had rejected the idea. As they drove, her phone lit up. It was a Bloomberg push alert. GAA stock halted. 700 Marta financing deal collapses. Rumors of investor revolt over operational failures. Julian was fast. 20 minutes later, Flight 112 touched down with a jarring thud at Las Vegas's Harry Reid International Airport. The plane was immediately directed to a remote stand, far from the main terminals. As soon as the engine spooled down, the cabin door was yanked open. It wasn't a gate agent. It was two GAA executives who had apparently been scrambled from a convention, and three grim-faced airport police officers. "Caroline Dumont?" one of the executives snapped, marching into the first-class cabin. Caroline, who had been sitting in a catatonic state, looked up. "You will come with us. Now." "What? I'm a passenger," she protested weakly. "You are a person of interest in an incident that has caused this airline catastrophic financial damage," the executive said, his voice dripping with venom. "You made a false report. You caused this diversion. Get her, officers." The police moved in. "Ma'am, please come with us. We just need to ask you a few questions." As Caroline Dumont was being escorted off the plane, her million-miler status irrelevant, the passengers all pulled out their phones. The story was everywhere now. The flight number, the diversion, the name Aria Vance, and now the name Caroline Dumont. Her face was being broadcast across the internet before she even set foot in the terminal. The other passengers were eventually deplaned and told they would be rebooked. The flight was cancelled. The crew was grounded. Flight 112 was, for all intents and purposes, a crime scene. Back at LAX, Susan Croft and Mark Jenkins were doing their own walk of shame. They were escorted by airport security out of the employee exit, their badges confiscated. News vans were already showing up. A Bloomberg reporter, having connected the dots, found them. "Susan Croft, Mark Jenkins, is it true you removed billionaire Aria Vance from Flight 112? Is it true you just bankrupted GAA? Was it racially motivated?" Susan burst into tears, a pathetic, wailing sob. I was just following policy. She looked. I didn't know. The reporter's microphone zeroed in on her. "You didn't know she was a billionaire? So if she'd just been a regular black woman, it would have been okay." Susan's face collapsed as she realized what she'd said. Mark pushed past the cameras, shoving his face into his jacket, and ran for the parking garage, a ruined man. In the 24 hours that followed, the story metastasized. It was no longer a financial story. It was a global scandal. The airline. Global Air Alliance's stock, when it was finally unfrozen, did not just drop. It evaporated. It fell 82% in pre-market trading before being halted again. Robert Strickland was fired by the board in an emergency 4:00 a.m. meeting. The $700 million was gone, and no other investor would touch the toxic airline. The Chapter 11 filing was converted, as Julian had predicted, to a Chapter 7 liquidation. The 80-year-old airline was, officially, dead. Its assets would be sold for scrap. 50,000 people were out of work, all because Susan Croft and Mark Jenkins couldn't stomach a black woman in first class. The employees. Susan Croft became the face of airline racism. Her crying face, paired with the quote, "I didn't know," was a global meme. She was unemployable. No airline would ever hire her. She lost her home, her pension, and her anonymity. Mark Jenkins faced a similar fate. He was blacklisted from the airline industry. The last anyone heard, he was working as a night manager at a 24-hour convenience store. The Karen, Caroline Dumont's karma, was perhaps the most precise. Her husband, Richard, was not just fired from Skadden Arps. The firm was sued by GAA's creditors for breach of fiduciary duty, claiming Richard Dumont's wife, a related party, had directly and maliciously sabotaged the company's only path to survival. The Dumonts were facing financial ruin, but the real blow came from Richard himself. He filed for divorce 2 days later, citing a clause in their prenuptial agreement that his wife's gross public misconduct, leading to financial ruin, nullified her claim to his assets. She was left with nothing. The Hamptons house was sold. The Cartier bracelets were pawned. The socialite who demanded La Grande Dame champagne was now a pariah, shunned by the very society she had tried to protect from Aria Vance. The protagonist, Aria Vance, landed in New York 2 hours before her original flight was even scheduled to arrive. She was in her Manhattan penthouse, drinking tea and looking at the city lights, when the news of GAA's full collapse broke. She felt a quiet sadness, not for the employees she'd fired or the Dumonts she'd ruined. They were data points who had chosen their own path. She felt sad for the 50,000 other employees, the pilots, the baggage handlers, the reservation agents who had just lost their jobs because of a culture their CEO had allowed to fester. She called Julian. "Julian," she said, "I have a new project." "Already?" he said. "You haven't even unpacked." "I'm reallocating that $100 million. We're going to create a GAA Employee Transition Fund. Severance packages and job placement services for all 50,000 laid-off workers, and buy their best routes and their newest planes out of the liquidation. I'm starting my own airline." Julian paused. "Aria, starting an airline is—" "I know what it is, Julian. It's a logistics problem. And I'm very, very good at logistics. But this one will be different. The first rule of corporate culture: we don't care what you wear. We care who you are. And we will never make a customer feel like they don't belong." 6 months. To the day after the humiliation on the jet bridge, a different kind of ceremony was taking place at the Tom Bradley International Terminal at LAX. The air was electric, not with the usual stressed-out energy of travel, but with the palpable buzz of a product launch. Gate 112, the same gate where Aria had been ejected, was decked in bunting. But the colors weren't the tired burgundy and grey of the defunct Global Air Alliance. They were a deep, star-field midnight blue and a sharp, digital silver. A fleet of brand-new aircraft, purchased for pennies on the dollar from GAA's liquidation auction, sat on the tarmac, their livery gleaming. They had been stripped to the studs and entirely rebuilt. This was the inaugural flight of Nexus Air. The media scrum was massive. Bloomberg, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal. They were all there, fighting for a shot. They weren't just covering an airline launch. They were covering the conclusion of the most dramatic business story of the decade. The GAA incident had already been immortalized as a Harvard Business School case study. The $700 million hoodie, prejudice as a material risk. At a simple podium, Julian Hayes, now acting as the public-facing COO of Nexus Air, addressed the crowd. "Today is not about revenge," he said, his voice crisp. "It's about the future. It's about a simple idea, that a company's culture is its most valuable asset, or its most catastrophic liability. Global Air Alliance failed because it forgot that. Nexus Air will succeed, because it is our founding principle." Aria Vance was nowhere to be seen. She wasn't at the podium. She wasn't posing for photos. She was, true to form, on the tarmac, in her simple uniform of a dark hoodie and jeans, doing a final systems check with the ground crew. Aboard Flight 001, the cabin crew was performing its final checks. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Maria, ran her hand over the smooth, silver-threaded upholstery. Maria was a 22-year veteran of GAA. When the airline collapsed, her pension evaporated. Her 401k was gone. She, like 50,000 others, had been left with nothing but a worthless uniform and a "thank you for your service" email. She remembered the terror, the weeks of not sleeping. Then the email from the Vance Foundation Transition Fund had arrived. It wasn't just a severance check. It was an offer, an invitation for an interview. The Nexus Air training had been different. It wasn't just about drink service and emergency exits. It was 3 solid weeks of psychology, de-escalation, and empowerment training. The core rule, repeated every day, was, empathy is our policy. They were taught to see people, not problems. They were given the authority to make decisions, to comp tickets, to upgrade passengers, to solve problems on the spot, with the full backing of the company. Aria herself had spoken to the graduating class. "I have only one rule," she'd said, standing before them. "I don't care what our passengers wear. I don't care where they come from. I care that we get them to their destination safely and with their dignity intact. Your old job was to follow a script. Your new job is to use your judgment. I will always trust your judgment over a rule book." Now, Maria adjusted her new, stylish uniform, a simple, dark blue pantsuit that was comfortable and professional, a world away from the restrictive, painted-on suits at GAA. She looked at her crew, a mix of bright-eyed new hires and seasoned veterans like herself, all hired from the wreckage of GAA. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice full of a pride she hadn't felt in years. "Let's show them how it's done." As the first passengers boarded, the difference was immediate. There was no first business economy. There was Solace, private pods for working or resting, and Connect, a premium economy-style cabin that had more legroom than GAA's old first class. The entire plane was one class, smart. Aria's Nexus Logistics AI was the backbone of everything. The boarding pass on your phone didn't just have a seat number, it had a boarding time. The app scanned the queue and algorithmically called groups in a dynamic flow, eliminating the gate lice scrum. The AI had already run predictive maintenance on the engines, ordered the catering based on analyzed passenger preferences from past flights. Aria, of course, had built an ethical data model for this, and even adjusted the cabin's circadian rhythm lighting to reduce jet lag. It was an airline run like a tech company. As Nexus Air Flight 001, bound for JFK, pushed back from Gate 112, its smooth, quiet engines spooling up, its fate was rocketing upward. In other parts of the country, the fates of those who had set this all in motion were still plummeting. The Cascade of Consequence. At a small, drab office in a Chicago suburb, Robert Strickland sat at a particle board desk. He was now a logistics consultant. It was a sham title. His phone never rang. His industry connections, once his greatest asset, now saw him as a pariah, the man who had fumbled a $70 billion company into the grave over a hoodie. He was watching the Nexus Air launch on a small, flickering TV in the corner. When Julian Hayes mentioned catastrophic liability, Strickland swept his desk clear in a flash of impotent rage, his world's best CEO mug shattering against the wall. He was a king in exile, with no kingdom, no subjects, and no one to blame but himself. In a quiet suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, Carolyn Dumont pushed a shopping cart down the aisle of a discount grocery store. The Cartier bracelets were long gone, sold to pay the first wave of her husband's legal bills before he'd filed for divorce. Her name, inextricably linked to the scandal, had made her a social leper. The old money circles she had tried so hard to protect had cast her out instantly. She was living with her sister, a pariah in her own family. As she passed the magazine rack, she saw the cover of Forbes, Aria Vance, standing in front of a Nexus Air engine, with the headline, "The 700 Million Flight. How One CEO Turned Bias into a $1 billion business." Caroline flinched, as if struck, and hurried away, her face hidden by a cheap scarf. And what of Susan Croft and Mark Jenkins? They were the new bogeymen of the service industry. Their names had become a verb. To pull a Croft, or to be Jenkinsed, was new slang for an employee whose blind adherence to a stupid policy or a moment of petty prejudice caused a corporate disaster. They were digital ghosts, unemployable and infamous. The internet had memorized their faces. Susan, her "I didn't know" face, a permanent, global meme of bigoted incompetence, was last seen working at a call center using a fake name. Mark was stocking shelves on the night shift at a big box store, forever looking over his shoulder, terrified of being recognized. Back in New York, Julian Hayes stood at a different press conference, this one for the Vance Foundation. The GAA Transition Fund was not a charity, he explained to a room of reporters. It was an investment. Of the 50,000 employees displaced by the GAA liquidation, our $100 million fund has, to date, successfully placed over 41,000 in new, stable jobs across the transport, logistics, and hospitality sectors. We hired 5,000 of the best for Nexus Air. The rest we connected with partner companies who value talent. We did not let that human capital go to waste. This, the Wall Street Journal later wrote, was the true genius of Aria's move. She hadn't just destroyed an enemy. She had absorbed its assets, its planes, its routes, and its best people, and rebuilt them into something stronger, faster, and smarter. She had turned a $700 million problem into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Nexus Air Flight 001 was 3 hours into its journey, cruising smoothly at 38,000 feet. Aria Vance was, of course, on board. She wasn't in Solace Pod 1A. She was in Connect Seat 18C, an aisle seat in the middle of the cabin, her custom laptop open, her screen a scrolling wall of code. She was working. A young flight attendant, new to the job, nervously approached her. "Ms. Vance, can I get you anything? A coffee? Water?" Aria looked up, her focus shifting from the code to the woman's face. She gave a small, warm smile. "Coffee would be great. Black, please." As the attendant returned, holding the cup, a college-age kid in a bright yellow, oversized hoodie and huge headphones bolted from his seat, making a dash for the lavatory. He wasn't looking. He slammed directly into the flight attendant's arm. Hot coffee went everywhere. It splashed across the attendant's arm, onto the floor, and directly onto Aria's hands and her expensive laptop. The cabin went silent. The kid froze, pulling off his headphones. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't see. Oh God." The flight attendant's face went white. This was it. Her first ever flight. She had just spilled hot coffee on the Billionaire CEO, who was famous for shutting down an entire airline over a bad in-flight experience. She was frozen in sheer, unadulterated terror. Aria Vance looked at her steaming laptop. She looked at her coffee-soaked hand. She looked at the terrified kid. She looked at the paralyzed flight attendant. Then she did the most unexpected thing of all. She laughed, a quiet, breathy laugh. "Well," Aria said, calmly picking up a napkin from her tray table, "that's one way to get my attention." She began to calmly wipe down her laptop. "It's fine. It's a spill-proof keyboard. I learned that lesson the hard way in my dorm room." She looked at the flight attendant, whose eyes were wide with a mix of shock and relief. "Are you okay? That was hot." Yes, Mum. Ms. Vance, it's all right," Aria said, her voice calm and kind. "Accidents happen. Let's just get some more napkins." She then turned to the kid, who was still stammering apologies. "Hey," Aria said, catching his eye. "It's just coffee. We're good." She smiled. "Cool, hoodie." The kid stared, bewildered, then broke into a massive grin. "Oh, thanks." He sheepishly continued to the lavatory. The flight attendant, now breathing again, rushed to get more supplies. Aria Vance, her hand still sticky with coffee, simply opened her laptop, verified the keyboard was fine, and went back to work. Maria, the lead attendant, had seen the whole thing from the galley. She watched as the tension in the cabin evaporated, replaced by a quiet murmur of relief. She looked at Arya, now lost in her screen again. Just another passenger, invisible and in total control. Maria finally understood. Nexus Air wasn't just a new airline, it was a new algorithm, and this time, its creator had coded it with a data point that GLA had never even known existed: grace. In the end, this was never about a hoodie. It was never about a seat on a plane. It was about a lesson that cost $700 million. The lesson? Power doesn't always scream. It doesn't always wear a suit or rattle with diamonds. Sometimes it sits quietly in seat 1A, reading a tablet, ready to change the world. And a person's bias? Their prejudice? That's not just a character flaw. In the modern world, it's a financial liability that can bankrupt an entire corporation. Karma isn't magic, it's just logistics. It's the simple, unavoidable fact that every action has a consequence. Susan, Mark, and Caroline created a data point. Arya Vance just ran the numbers. What do you think? Was Arya's response too harsh, or was it the precise, calculated karma they deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you loved this story of hard karma and real-world consequences, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more true stories of justice. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.